Imagine this. You are Marguerite, a 20-year-old woman standing in the shadows of a narrow alley in 14th century Paris. The cobblestones beneath your bare feet are slick with refuse and rain. Your threadbare dress, once blue, now bears stains you prefer not to identify. The metallic taste of fear coats your tongue as heavy footsteps echo from the darkness ahead. Tonight, like every night for the past 3 years, you will risk your life to earn enough coins for bread. You carry a small blade hidden in your sleeve, a vial of bitter herbs tucked against your breast, and the hard-won knowledge that the wrong client could end your existence before dawn. What you are about to experience represents one of history's most dangerous professions, where survival required skills no woman should ever need to learn. The man approaching from the shadows has paid your price, but that payment guarantees nothing except his temporary claim on your body. Whether you see tomorrow depends on your ability to read violence in a stranger's eyes, to fight or flee when negotiation fails, and to endure what cannot be escaped. What you don't realize yet is that medieval prostitution was not just about selling intimacy. It was about surviving a world designed to destroy women like you. Think medieval sex work was just about lying back and earning coins? Think again. You are about to discover a brutal economy of survival where women developed elaborate strategies to stay alive in a profession that combined constant violence, deadly diseases, and systematic exploitation that would make modern trafficking look restrained by comparison. The reality of medieval prostitution was a nightmare of ingenuity, born from desperation, where women created underground networks, developed primitive self-defense techniques, and invented survival methods so extreme they sound like medieval torture. Manuals. These were not passive victims. They were warriors fighting a daily battle against clients who viewed them as disposable objects, authorities who treated them as criminals, and diseases that could kill within days. Before we dive deeper into these forgotten histories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that subscribe button. These buried voices deserve to be heard, and there are so many more stories waiting to be told. You're helping preserve these testimonies by staying connected to this journey through history's darkest corners. Medieval prostitution operated within a complex web of legal, religious, and economic systems that created a perpetual state of vulnerability for the women trapped within it. Unlike modern sex work, which at least theoretically operates within frameworks of consent and choice, medieval prostitution was primarily a consequence of economic desperation, family abandonment, or outright trafficking. The typical path into prostitution began with catastrophe. Young women whose families had been destroyed by war, plague, or famine found themselves alone in cities where no respectable employment existed for unattached females. Widows whose husbands died owing debts discovered that creditors could demand payment in ways that destroyed their reputations forever. Daughters sold by desperate parents joined the ranks of women for whom prostitution represented the only alternative to starvation. The legal status of prostitutes created impossible contradictions that made survival even more precarious. In most medieval cities, prostitution was simultaneously illegal and tolerated, regulated, and condemned. Authorities collected taxes from prostitutes while publicly condemning their existence. Church officials preached against sexual immorality while often owning the buildings where prostitutes worked. This legal limbo meant that prostitutes had no recourse when clients refused to pay, became violent, or demanded services beyond what was agreed. They could not appeal to authorities without risking arrest, fines, or worse punishments. The law protected their clients while criminalizing their survival, creating a system where abuse was not just tolerated, but legally sanctioned. The geography of medieval prostitution was carefully controlled through regulations that forced women into specific districts, usually the most dangerous and unsanitary areas of cities. These red light districts were typically located near city gates, where transient populations of merchants, soldiers, and travelers created steady demand, but also concentrated violence and disease. The infamous Southwark district in London, where prostitutes were known as Winchester geese due to their regulation by the Bishop of Winchester, exemplified this systematic segregation. Women were required to live and work in designated buildings, wear distinctive clothing that marked their profession, and submit to regular inspections by both church and civic authorities. But here's where the survival strategies begin to emerge. Within these confined spaces, prostitutes developed sophisticated networks of mutual protection and information sharing. Experienced women taught newcomers how to recognize dangerous clients, how to hide money from theft, and how to treat the injuries and diseases that came with their profession. The most crucial survival skill was learning to read clients quickly and accurately. Medieval prostitutes developed an almost supernatural ability to assess threat levels within moments of meeting potential customers. They studied facial expressions, body language, speech patterns, and clothing to identify men who might become violent, refuse payment, or carry diseases. Certain signs became universal warnings passed between women like a secret language. Clients who avoided eye contact often planned violence. Men who negotiated aggressively over price frequently refused to pay afterward. Customers who insisted on privacy beyond normal arrangements were preparing activities that could prove fatal. Women who survived in this profession learned to trust their instincts absolutely. A feeling of unease about a particular client, even one who appeared wealthy and respectable, could mean the difference between earning coins and dying in an alley. The most successful prostitutes developed reputations for being selective, even when selectivity meant going hungry. But survival required more than intuition. It demanded practical self-defense skills that transformed medieval prostitutes into urban warriors. Most carried concealed weapons, typically small knives that could be hidden in clothing or hair ornaments. Some specialized in poisons, developing knowledge of herbs and compounds that could incapacitate dangerous clients. The use of confederates was another crucial strategy. Women worked in pairs or groups whenever possible, with one woman entertaining the client while others remained nearby, ready to intervene if violence erupted. Brothel keepers, despite their exploitation of the women, also provided some protection, since dead prostitutes generated no revenue. Physical techniques for escaping dangerous situations were passed down through informal networks. Women learned how to break free from restraints, how to use household objects as weapons, and how to inflict maximum damage quickly before fleeing. Some became experts in pressure points that could render a man unconscious, while others specialized in techniques for escaping through windows or roof spaces. The economic realities of medieval prostitution created additional survival challenges that required constant adaptation and innovation. Unlike modern sex work, where women might have some control over pricing and services, medieval prostitutes operated in markets controlled entirely by demand, legal restrictions, and exploitation by intermediaries. Pricing was typically set by local authorities or brothel owners, leaving individual women with little bargaining power. The average transaction might earn a prostitute between 1 and 4 pence, equivalent to the cost of a loaf of bread. From this meager sum, she had to pay rent for her workspace, fees to authorities, protection money to various criminal elements, and costs for food, clothing, and medical care. This economic pressure forced women to see multiple clients daily, increasing their exposure to violence and disease. During busy periods, such as market days or religious festivals, a prostitute might service 20 or more men in a single day. The physical and psychological toll was devastating, but the alternative was starvation. Successful prostitutes learned to diversify their income streams beyond basic sexual services. Some became expert seamstresses, earning additional money repairing clothing for clients. Others developed skills in brewing, cooking, or laundering that provided supplementary income. The most entrepreneurial established their own small businesses, often involving other women in cooperative arrangements. Money management became a crucial survival skill since prostitutes faced constant theft from clients, authorities, and criminal elements. Women developed elaborate hiding places for their earnings, sometimes burying coins in multiple locations or investing in portable valuables that could be quickly converted to cash. The formation of informal insurance networks among prostitutes provided some economic security. Groups of women would pool resources to support members during illness, pregnancy, or other periods when earning was impossible. These networks also provided loans for emergencies and helped finance escapes for women seeking to leave the profession. But perhaps the most important economic survival strategy was building relationships with specific clients who provided regular income and some measure of protection. These arrangements, while still exploitative, offered women slightly more security than relying entirely on random encounters with strangers. Disease management represented one of the most complex survival challenges facing medieval prostitutes. In an era before antibiotics or effective treatments for sexually transmitted infections, these diseases could progress to horrifying symptoms that made work impossible and death inevitable. Medieval prostitutes developed extensive knowledge of herbal remedies and primitive medical treatments that they shared within their communities. While many of these treatments were ineffective or even dangerous, some had genuine medicinal properties that provided temporary relief or slowed disease progression. Mercury compounds, though highly toxic, were used to treat syphilis symptoms. Women who could afford mercury treatments might experience temporary improvement, though the mercury poisoning itself created new health problems. Herbal douches using vinegar, wine, or various plant extracts were employed both as contraceptives and as attempts to prevent or treat infections. The detection and management of pregnancy presented additional survival challenges. Pregnancy made physical labor more difficult and dangerous, while also creating the possibility of another mouth to feed or another person to lose. Medieval prostitutes became experts in recognizing early pregnancy symptoms and had access to various methods for terminating unwanted pregnancies. These methods ranged from relatively safe herbal preparations to extremely dangerous procedures that often proved fatal. Women shared knowledge about which herbs could induce miscarriages, though the line between an effective dose and a lethal one was often unclear. Some resorted to physical trauma, inserting objects or subjecting themselves to violence that might terminate pregnancies, but could also cause fatal injuries. The psychological strategies for survival were as important as the physical ones. Medieval prostitutes developed elaborate mental techniques for dissociating from traumatic experiences, for maintaining some sense of personal dignity despite constant degradation, and for preserving hope despite seemingly hopeless circumstances. Many created alternative identities or personas that they adopted during work, allowing them to psychologically separate their professional activities from their private selves. These personas often involved elaborate backstories, different names, and carefully constructed personalities designed to protect their authentic emotional cores. Religion provided another coping mechanism, despite the Church's condemnation of their profession. Many prostitutes maintained private spiritual practices, often focusing on female saints who were believed to offer protection and forgiveness. Saint Mary Magdalene, traditionally associated with reformed prostitutes, was particularly popular among medieval sex workers. The creation of chosen families among groups of women provided emotional support that helped counteract the isolation and stigma of their profession. These relationships often became stronger than blood family ties, since they were based on shared experiences and mutual survival needs rather than social expectations. Some women developed elaborate fantasy lives that helped them endure their daily realities. They imagined alternative futures, created mental escapes during traumatic encounters, and maintained hope through detailed plans for leaving the profession, even when such plans were unrealistic. Violence was the constant companion of medieval prostitutes, requiring survival strategies that transformed ordinary women into experts in recognizing, avoiding, and responding to physical threats. The nature of violence in medieval prostitution was not random or spontaneous. It was systematic and predictable, following patterns that experienced women learned to identify and counter. Client violence took many forms, from refusal to pay agreed-upon fees to sexual assault that went beyond negotiated services to outright murder for sport or to eliminate witnesses to other crimes. The most dangerous clients were often those with social standing to protect, who might kill prostitutes to prevent exposure of their activities. Soldiers presented particular dangers, especially during times of war when discipline was relaxed and violence was normalized. Groups of military men would sometimes engage in competitive abuse of prostitutes, seeing who could inflict the most degradation or pain. These encounters frequently resulted in permanent injuries or death. Religious authorities, despite their public condemnation of prostitution, were often among the most violent clients. Priests, monks, and other clerics seemed to view their interactions with prostitutes as opportunities to punish women for their perceived sinfulness, often combining sexual activity with physical abuse, justified as moral correction. The development of early warning systems among prostitutes created networks of information that could prevent violence before it occurred. Women would share descriptions of dangerous clients, including physical characteristics, names when known, and specific threats or unusual behaviors that marked them as particularly hazardous. These warning systems operated through various channels. Brothel keepers, despite their economic exploitation of the women, had incentives to protect their workers from clients who might cause permanent damage. Street prostitutes developed hand signals and code words that could quickly communicate danger to nearby colleagues. Some enterprising women created informal registries of dangerous clients, maintaining lists that were shared among trusted associates. These lists included not just obviously violent men, but also those who carried diseases, who refused payment, or who made unreasonable demands that could escalate into violence. The most sophisticated defense networks involved cooperation with other marginal groups in medieval society. Prostitutes formed alliances with thieves, beggars, and other criminals who could provide protection in exchange for information or services. These relationships created an underground economy of mutual aid among society's outcasts. But survival also required knowing when to fight and when to submit. Medieval prostitutes learned to distinguish between clients who would become more violent if resisted and those who could be discouraged through defensive action. Reading these situations correctly could prevent rape from becoming murder. The weapons and defensive techniques employed by medieval prostitutes were surprisingly sophisticated, representing generations of accumulated knowledge about urban combat and survival. Unlike knights who fought with honor codes and rules of engagement, prostitutes fought for their lives using any means necessary. Concealed weapons were the primary line of defense. Small knives were most common, typically hidden in specially sewn pockets in clothing, woven into hair ornaments, or attached to the inside of shoes. These knives were designed for quick deployment rather than extended combat, meant to inflict enough damage to create an opportunity for escape. Poisoned needles and pins represented more sophisticated weapons. These could be concealed almost anywhere and deployed with minimal movement, making them ideal for situations where overt resistance was impossible. The poisons used were typically derived from common plants and mushrooms, substances that prostitutes could obtain and prepare without arousing suspicion. Household objects became weapons through necessity and ingenuity. Hairpins could be sharpened and used to target vulnerable areas, like eyes and throat. Eating utensils were modified for combat effectiveness. Even cosmetics could be weaponized, with face powders containing irritating substances that could temporarily blind attackers. The use of environmental advantages required prostitutes to become experts in urban geography and architecture. They memorized escape routes through complex building layouts, identified windows and rooftops that could provide alternative exits, and knew which local establishments might offer temporary sanctuary. Some women specialized in techniques for fighting in confined spaces, developing skills that allowed them to use walls, furniture, and architectural features to their advantage. The ability to fight effectively in a small room or narrow alley could mean the difference between escape and death. Fire was both a weapon and a last resort. Prostitutes learned to use candles, lamps, and cooking fires as defensive tools, both for the immediate threat of burns and for the psychological impact of flame on attackers. Some carried small containers of oil or alcohol that could be ignited and thrown. The development of group tactics allowed multiple women to coordinate their defense against particularly dangerous clients or organized attacks. These tactics included distraction techniques, where one woman would engage an attacker while others positioned themselves for surprise attacks, and coordination of multiple escape routes that prevented clients from blocking all possible exits. Training in these survival techniques was informal but intensive. Experienced prostitutes took responsibility for educating newcomers, sharing knowledge that had been accumulated through years of violence and survival. This education included not just physical techniques, but psychological preparation for the realities of combat and violence. Mock attacks and practice sessions allowed women to develop muscle memory and quick reflexes that could save their lives in actual encounters. These training sessions also helped identify women who showed particular aptitude for violence, who might serve as protectors for others in their communities. The seasonal rhythms of medieval life created varying levels of danger that required adaptive survival strategies throughout the year. Different times brought different types of clients, different levels of violence, and different survival challenges that experienced prostitutes learned to anticipate and prepare for. Winter months were particularly brutal, combining increased demand from men seeking warmth and comfort with reduced opportunities for escape due to weather conditions. The shorter days and longer nights provided more cover for violence, while cold weather made outdoor escape more dangerous than indoor confrontation. Harvest seasons brought influxes of agricultural workers with money to spend, but also with frustrations and aggression built up through months of hard labor. These men often arrived in groups, creating situations where individual violence could escalate into mob attacks that overwhelmed normal defensive strategies. Religious festivals presented unique challenges, as increased clerical presence created more opportunities for the particularly dangerous encounters with priests and monks, while also bringing larger crowds that could provide both protection and additional threats. War created the most dangerous conditions for medieval prostitutes. Armies on the move brought large numbers of violent men with relaxed discipline and limited accountability. The chaos of war also reduced the effectiveness of normal protection systems, as civil authorities focused on military rather than civilian concerns. But experienced prostitutes learned to exploit the rhythms of war as well as survive them. They developed knowledge of military movements that allowed them to position themselves advantageously, following armies at safe distances to take advantage of demand while avoiding direct contact with military violence. The economic opportunities of wartime had to be balanced against the increased risks. While soldiers often had more money to spend than typical civilian clients, they were also more likely to be violent, diseased, and unpredictable. Women had to develop specialized strategies for dealing with military clients that differed significantly from their techniques for handling civilian customers. The aftermath of military conflicts created additional survival challenges, as defeated armies might take out their frustrations on available civilian targets, while victorious forces might celebrate through violence against vulnerable populations. Prostitutes learned to recognize the signs of military movements and prepare accordingly. Some women developed expertise in serving military markets specifically, learning the cultures and languages of different armies, understanding military hierarchies that could provide protection, and developing relationships with officers who could offer some security in exchange for exclusive services. The relationship between medieval prostitutes and law enforcement created a complex survival challenge that required constant navigation between cooperation and resistance. Unlike modern policing, medieval law enforcement was often indistinguishable from organized crime, with officials who demanded bribes, sexual services, and other forms of tribute from the women they supposedly regulated. Corrupt officials represented some of the most dangerous clients, since they combined the violence potential of typical customers with the authority to arrest, fine, or otherwise punish women who resisted their demands. These encounters required particularly sophisticated survival strategies that balanced submission with self-preservation. Some prostitutes developed ongoing relationships with specific officials that provided protection in exchange for regular payments or services. These arrangements were inherently exploitative, but they offered some security against both random violence and legal persecution. The judicial system itself presented additional survival challenges, as prostitutes who were arrested faced fines they couldn't afford, punishments that could permanently damage their ability to work, and exposure to additional violence within legal custody. Women learned to navigate court systems through various strategies, including the cultivation of relationships with clerks and minor officials who could influence their treatment, the development of legal knowledge that allowed them to understand their rights and obligations, and the creation of support networks that could provide bail money or other assistance during legal troubles. The most successful survival strategy involved becoming too valuable to local authorities to arrest or harass significantly. This might involve providing information about criminal activities, serving as informal agents for official surveillance, or offering specialized services that officials couldn't obtain elsewhere. Some women developed expertise in languages, literacy, or other skills that made them useful to authorities beyond their sexual services. These additional capabilities provided some protection and could sometimes offer paths out of prostitution entirely. The role of informant was particularly complex, requiring women to balance the protection it offered against the risks of retaliation from criminal elements they might inform against. Successful informants learned to provide enough useful information to maintain their protection while avoiding involvement in activities that could prove fatal. The development of legal knowledge became a survival skill in its own right. Women who understood the complexities of medieval law could sometimes exploit legal technicalities to avoid punishment, or could provide legal services to other members of their community who faced official persecution. The relationship with religious authorities presented its own unique survival challenges, as the Church's official condemnation of prostitution coexisted with widespread clerical participation in the commercial sex trade. This contradiction created opportunities for manipulation and exploitation that required careful navigation. The business models of medieval prostitution were far more complex than simple fee-for-service transactions, involving elaborate economic relationships that women had to master for survival. Understanding these models was crucial for women seeking to maximize their earnings while minimizing their exposure to violence and exploitation. Brothel prostitution offered some protection and regularity, but at the cost of significant economic exploitation. Brothel keepers typically claimed 60 to 70% of earnings while providing basic security, housing, and access to clients. Women in these arrangements had to navigate complex power dynamics with madams who controlled their working conditions, client access, and personal freedom. The most successful brothel prostitutes learned to develop independent relationships with high-value clients who might eventually support them outside the brothel system. This required careful balance, as brothel keepers violently discouraged any activities that threatened their control over their workers. Street prostitution offered more economic freedom, but dramatically increased exposure to violence and legal prosecution. Women working independently had to develop their own security systems, client networks, and business practices while avoiding the territorial disputes that could arise with organized criminal elements. The development of regular client relationships was crucial for economic survival in any setting. These arrangements provided predictable income and some measure of protection, but required women to maintain complex emotional and sexual relationships with men who often viewed them as property rather than people. Some prostitutes specialized in particular types of clients or services that commanded higher prices. This might involve catering to specific fetishes, providing companionship rather than just sexual services, or developing expertise in entertaining groups rather than individuals. The most entrepreneurial women created their own small businesses that extended beyond prostitution into related services like laundering, brewing, or providing meeting spaces for illegal activities. These businesses could provide some economic independence and potential paths out of prostitution. Money management was a crucial survival skill, as prostitutes faced constant theft from clients, authorities, and criminal elements. Women developed elaborate systems for hiding and protecting their earnings, often involving multiple cash locations and investment in portable valuables that could be quickly converted to cash. The formation of economic cooperatives among groups of prostitutes provided some financial security through shared resources and mutual support. These arrangements might involve pooling money for housing, sharing the costs of protection, or providing loans during periods when individual women couldn't work due to illness or injury. Credit relationships with local merchants and service providers were essential for survival during periods of low earnings. Women had to develop reputations for reliability that would encourage others to extend credit, while also managing debt loads that could become impossible to repay. The seasonal nature of demand required sophisticated financial planning. Women had to save money during busy periods to survive slower times, while also managing the increased expenses that came with higher activity levels, such as medical care and clothing replacement. Investment in appearance and presentation was crucial for maintaining earning potential. This involved not just clothing and cosmetics, but also medical care to treat visible symptoms of disease, dental care to maintain attractiveness, and nutrition adequate to sustain the physical demands of the profession. The complexities of taxation and regulation meant that prostitutes had to navigate official fee structures while also managing informal tribute payments to various criminal and official elements. Understanding these systems was essential for avoiding legal problems while maintaining profitability. Some women developed expertise in currency exchange and trade, taking advantage of the international nature of medieval commerce to profit from foreign clients and cross-border transactions. This might involve learning multiple languages and understanding different monetary systems. The most successful prostitutes eventually accumulated enough capital to transition into other roles within the commercial sex industry, becoming madams, brothel owners, or investors in related businesses. This transition required business skills that extended far beyond the survival techniques needed for direct sex work. But the ultimate survival strategy for medieval prostitutes was finding a way out of the profession entirely, a goal that required years of planning, resource accumulation, and careful navigation of social and economic barriers that were designed to prevent such escapes. The paths out of prostitution were extremely limited and required either extraordinary circumstances or years of careful preparation. Marriage to a client who was willing to overlook a woman's past represented one of the few legitimate exits, but this required finding men who were both financially secure and socially marginal enough to accept a former prostitute as a wife. Religious conversion offered another potential escape route, as some convents accepted former prostitutes as novices. However, this path typically required significant financial contributions to the religious institution, money that was difficult for prostitutes to accumulate given their economic circumstances. The development of alternative skills that could provide legitimate employment was crucial for any successful transition. This might involve learning crafts like weaving or brewing, developing literacy that could lead to work as a scribe or teacher, or accumulating enough capital to establish an independent business. Geographic relocation was often necessary for women seeking to escape their past, as the stigma of prostitution was difficult to overcome in communities where their history was known. This required not just travel expenses, but also the social connections necessary to establish new identities in different locations. The most successful escapes often involved elaborate deceptions about past history, requiring women to create entirely fictional backgrounds that could withstand casual scrutiny. This might involve forging documents, bribing officials to alter records, or developing relationships with people willing to vouch for false histories. Some women found opportunities in the households of wealthy clients who were willing to provide long-term support in exchange for exclusive sexual access. While these arrangements were still fundamentally exploitative, they offered more security and social respectability than street prostitution. The formation of partnerships with men in marginal trades or professions provided opportunities for women to contribute labor and capital to joint enterprises that could eventually provide legitimate income. These partnerships often began as client relationships, but evolved into more complex economic and personal arrangements. Migration to colonial territories or frontier regions sometimes offered opportunities for women to reinvent themselves in communities where their past history was unknown and social conventions were less rigid. However, these opportunities typically involved significant dangers and uncertainties. The accumulation of enough capital to purchase property or establish substantial businesses was the most secure route out of prostitution, but it required extraordinary dedication and luck to save sufficient money from the minimal earnings typical of medieval sex work. Even successful escapes from prostitution often remained precarious, as former prostitutes faced ongoing social stigma and legal vulnerability that could force them back into sex work if their alternative arrangements failed. The networks of mutual support that sustained prostitutes during their working years often continued to provide assistance for women seeking to leave the profession through financial support, social connections, and practical advice about managing the transition to legitimate work. But for most medieval prostitutes, the profession was a lifetime sentence rather than a temporary expenditure. The combination of economic necessity, social stigma, legal vulnerability, and physical damage from years of violence and disease made escape extremely difficult. Understanding the survival strategies of these women reveals not just the brutal realities of medieval prostitution, but also the remarkable resilience and ingenuity of people facing impossible circumstances. These were not passive victims, but active agents developing sophisticated techniques for navigating one of history's most dangerous professions. As we reach the end of this journey into one of history's darkest corners, we must acknowledge the extraordinary courage and resilience of women like Marguerite, who faced impossible choices and developed remarkable strategies for survival, circumstances designed to destroy them. Medieval prostitutes created elaborate networks of mutual protection, developed sophisticated techniques for recognizing and avoiding violence, and invented business practices that maximized their chances of survival in a profession that combined systematic exploitation with constant physical danger. Their stories remind us that survival often requires skills and knowledge that no person should need, but that human ingenuity and mutual support can create possibilities even in the most hopeless circumstances. These women were not passive victims of medieval society. They were active agents who fought daily battles for their lives and dignity. The survival strategies they developed represent some of the most sophisticated techniques for managing violence, disease, and economic exploitation in human history. Their knowledge of herbal medicine, self-defense, urban navigation, and psychological survival techniques rivaled that of military professionals and medical practitioners. Their networks of mutual support and information sharing created informal institutions that provided security and assistance in a world that offered neither legal protection nor social recognition. These networks often functioned more effectively than official institutions in protecting vulnerable people. The economic innovations they developed, from complex client management systems to sophisticated money-hiding techniques, demonstrate remarkable business acumen developed under extreme pressure. Their understanding of market dynamics, risk management, and resource allocation would impress modern economists. But perhaps most importantly, their stories remind us that the capacity for human resilience and mutual aid persists even in the most brutal circumstances. When formal institutions fail to protect vulnerable people, informal networks emerge to fill the gap. The courage required to survive as a medieval prostitute encompassed physical bravery in facing violence, psychological strength in maintaining dignity despite constant degradation, intellectual creativity in developing survival strategies, and moral integrity in supporting other women facing similar challenges. Their legacy extends beyond the specific circumstances of medieval prostitution to offer insights into how marginalized people create survival strategies under any system of oppression. The techniques they developed for reading danger, managing resources, and providing mutual support remain relevant for understanding modern situations where people face systematic violence and exploitation. Today, when we encounter stories of human trafficking, sexual exploitation, or systematic violence against vulnerable populations, the medieval prostitutes remind us that survival often requires extraordinary ingenuity, and that the people facing such circumstances are active agents rather than passive victims. Their stories also remind us that the systems creating such vulnerability are human constructions that can be changed through collective action and social recognition of shared humanity. The same creativity and mutual support that enabled medieval prostitutes to survive impossible circumstances can be channeled toward creating societies where such survival strategies are unnecessary. The women who developed these survival techniques have long since returned to dust, but their courage and ingenuity echo through history as testimony to the unbreakable human spirit and the power of mutual aid in the face of systematic oppression. We remember their struggles not to sensationalize their suffering, but to honor their humanity and recognize the remarkable strength required to survive in circumstances that would crush most people. Their stories demand that we acknowledge both the brutality of the systems that created their vulnerability and the extraordinary courage they demonstrated in facing impossible choices. If this exploration into the shadows of human survival has opened your eyes to hidden truths about resilience and resistance, subscribe to continue this journey together. There are countless more stories buried in history's archives, waiting for someone willing to listen. These voices from the past remind us why understanding the full spectrum of human experience matters. Click that subscribe button to ensure these forgotten testimonies reach others who seek to understand both the darkest capabilities of human systems and the brightest examples of human courage. And remember, the survival strategies of medieval prostitutes were born from necessity in a world that offered no protection to vulnerable women. Their stories remind us that such protection should never be taken for granted, and that the systems ensuring such protection must be actively maintained and defended by every generation.